Okay, hello everybody. Wow, I just watching those numbers filter into the participants. We've got 120 at this point. Wonderful. So welcome everyone to the AIA Archaeology Hour. This is hosted by the Archaeological Institute of America. My name is Matt Simonton. I'm the treasurer of the Central Arizona chapter of the Archaeological Institute. And I want to thank Meredith Langlitz and Ben Thomas of the Central Society for inviting me to host this evening. It's very exciting to be engaged in this online format with so many participants. And you have a real treat tonight, and I'm sure you're looking forward to it. Before we begin, I just want to say a little bit about my own society, that of Central Arizona, based out of Phoenix. My institution is Arizona State University. It's the biggest institution in the area. U of A in Tucson is just the south of us. And we are the biggest chapter of the AIA in the American Southwest. We're very proud of that. And we are happy to host multiple events every year, largely in the form of public lectures. We have 3 total lectures this fall semester, and we'll have a further 3 in the spring. We had a very exciting lecture on Cypriot archaeology, specifically Cypriot archaeology in the New York City Metropolitan Museum of Art in the early 20th century. That was earlier this semester. And we just had a lecture over the weekend at what is called the Pueblo Grande Museum here in Phoenix. That's an indigenous Hohokam site here in the American Southwest, just right near the Phoenix airport. And we were very happy to host Arizona State's own anthropologist Joel Polka talking about Maya culture for that lecture. It was, by all accounts, great. Our membership really enjoyed it. And I should add that the Pueblo Grande Museum is an institution that we are very happy to work with here in the area. In past years, particularly before COVID, and we're hoping to pick this up again, on International Archaeology Day, we would join in reinforcing the indigenous site at Pueblo Grande Museum. And that involves actually slinging mud, literally mudslingers, making mud and slinging it at the various structures at the Pueblo Grande Museum in order to reinforce the pre-modern, pre-Columbian sites. So it's a very fun hands-on experience for our members. We also have a local event called Apples in Archaeology, which has been generously supported by the AIA in the past, in which we bring middle school and high school students who are learning Latin and Greek to ASU campus to engage in a day of activities and contests centered around the ancient Mediterranean. So it's in my humble personal opinion, it's a thriving society. We're very proud of what we do. And once again, I'm just very happy to be involved tonight. So before I introduce tonight's speaker, as you can see from our homepage here, we have Dr. Alaka Wali of the Field Museum talking to us. I just want to say a few things about the National Institute. So the Archaeological Institute of America is the oldest archaeological institute in North America. And as you can see here, you can become a member yourself at archaeological.org/join. Benefits include, depending on your level of membership, Archaeology Magazine, or if you're into more sort of rarefied forms of scholarship, also membership might include the American Journal of Archaeology. We are very much grateful for your support. If you can donate to the AIA annual fund, this supports various programs for archaeological fieldwork in action, and also supporting the ability of students to participate hands-on in archaeological digs. As you can see here, you can make a gift online at archaeological.org/donate. I just want to note for everyone attending here. The lecture is a live presentation that's being recorded by the AIA, so act accordingly. Recording by attendees is strictly prohibited because the AIA respects the intellectual property of its presenters and asks that viewers do the same. So thank you for your understanding on that front. Now it's time for me to have the honor of introducing this evening's speaker, Dr. Alaka Wali of the Field Museum. As you can see from this title screen, Dr. Wali will be delivering a lecture tonight on inclusive museum narratives, contextualizing collections through collaboration. I just want to tell you a little bit about Dr. Wali's very impressive curriculum vitae. She is curator emerita of North American anthropology in the Science and Education Division of the Field Museum. She was the founding director of the Center for Cultural Understanding and Change from 1995 to 2010. During that time, she pioneered the development of participatory social science research and community engagement processes based in museum science. She curates the North American collection, one of the museum's largest regional anthropology holdings. Since 2000, she has worked closely with ecologists and museum educators to develop innovative community engagement strategies for people living in and around biodiverse regions of the Western Amazon and urban Chicago. I like that. That's a great pairing. These efforts are now centered in the Keller Science Action Center at the Field Museum. Her research focuses on the relationship between art and the capacity for social resilience. She has authored several books and monographs and published over 50 articles on a wide range of topics, including museum practice, political ecology, and urban anthropology. She has curated numerous exhibitions, pioneering co-curated exhibitions with Native American contemporary artists. She led the curation of the renovation of the North American Anthropology Hall, opened in May 2022, which broke new ground for the Field Museum with a deeply collaborative approach that privileges the perspectives of Native American scholars, artists, and community members. With that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Alaka Wali once again to deliver a lecture on inclusive museum narratives, contextualizing collections through collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt, for that introduction, and thank you to the Archaeology Institute of America for inviting me to speak with you all tonight. And I'm just gonna share my screen, I hope. And show my slides. Oops, sorry. All right, so thank you. Thank you also to the interpreters for helping me reach even a broader audience. Thank you so much. I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement, and then move on to telling you a little bit about the new hall that is the subject of tonight's talk. The Field Museum acknowledges that it was built on the traditional homelands of the Potawatomi, the Winnebago or Ho-Chunk, the Otoe, the Missouria, the Iowa, the Menominee, the Meskwaki, the Sauk, the Miami, the Wea, the Piankashaw, the Kickapoo, the Illinois Confederacy, the Ojibwe, and the Odawa. The museum recognizes that the region we now call Chicago was the traditional homelands of many indigenous nations and remains home to diverse Native peoples today. The land we walk was and remains Native land. Let me add that as an immigrant to these shores, I came from India when I was 6. I grew up not really knowing the histories of Native Americans and the way they shape the beauty of these landscapes. I'm profoundly grateful for all I've learned in these past few years from colleagues and collaborators. So the opening of Native Truths, Our Voices, Our Stories in May of 2022 represented the culmination of almost 5 years of planning and development, during the course of which the museum experienced the beginning of a paradigm shift in thinking about how we can better collaborate with communities whose heritage is represented in our collections. In this talk, I discussed the process through which the Field Museum approached the creation of this exhibition, why we chose the collaborative approach to telling stories about Native American contemporary concerns and lifeways, and why it matters. The new exhibition replaced the old Native North America Hall, which perhaps some of you have visited in the past, and which had remained unchanged since the late 1950s. I'll start by discussing some of the antecedents to the development of Native truths, then describe the nature of the collaboration, and conclude with some thoughts on the future opportunities represented by the paradigm shift. So this is a little photo of a basket in our collection. It's a pomo basket collected around 1900 in Lake County, California. As perhaps some of you know, the Field Museum is considered the 4th largest natural history museum in the world by the size of its collection. The anthropology collections are at about 2 million cultural items, of which the North American collection is the largest regional group. And in general, I think you're all familiar, Natural History Museum anthropology collections focus on non-Western cultures, including ancient civilizations such as Egypt, the Inca, the Maya, China, and so on. So I took over curatorial responsibility for the North American collection in 2012. By that time, the Field Museum had already been experimenting with engaging communities around how to tell their stories and that of their ancestors, off and on since the early 1990s. The team that had developed the Hall of Africa, for example, conducted extensive consultation with African Americans and Africana scholars. And curator John Terrell worked over many years with the Maori community of Tocumaro Bay to curate the Warenui, the Maori meeting house, which you see here, that has been in the Field Museum's care since the early 20th century. For the Ancient Americas exhibit, also, the Central and South American scholars acted as advisors, and a small group of Chicago Native American residents advised on how to include their perspectives to connect the presentation of the past to their present-day concerns. But by and large, these experiments were one-off, and no systematic strategy for inclusive storytelling emerged. Yet nationally, scholars and cultural activists were challenging museums to change curatorial and stewardship practices to more concertedly bring in a multiplicity of voices to change representational practice and rethink how museums treated the heritage of non-Western peoples in their collection. Museums struggled to respond and began to reflect on the colonial roots of their collecting practices, as most had been established during the era of European colonial dominance of Africa, Asia, and South America, and so on. So that's in part the reason that the focus of collections that were built in that colonial times are on non-Western cultures. In the case of collections of Native American heritage, the consideration of how to work with communities was profoundly impacted by the passage of the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, NAGPRA, in 1990, which mandated that museums undertake the return of ancestors' remains, funerary objects, and objects of sacred patrimony. The law is ambiguously worded, though, and in parts and in places a heavy burden on Native American tribes to prove their claims for repatriation. Although just this last week, new regulations were released for public comment with the intent of addressing some of the flaws in the law. In the 30 years since NAGPRA was enacted, museums and tribes have entered into relationships, sometimes merely transactional, but sometimes something deeper that can lead to improved collaboration and inclusion of Native American perspectives in representation and methodologies for care of their collection. This then is the context in which we started the process of renovating the old Native American Hall at the Field Museum. Did the other interpreter come on? Just wondering if I should. Okay, I guess I'll keep going. Okay, so this is the old Native North American Hall as it was before the new hall took its place. And it was the only cultural exhibition at the Field Museum that had not been renovated since its initial installment in the 1950s. So starting in the mid-1980s, the museum had started renovating all of the cultural halls. So the Hall of the Pacific, the Hall of Africa, those were all changed. But this hall had remained unchanged since the 1950s. And as you can see, it retained the ambiance and approach to representation of that time, displaying Native American lifeways as if frozen in a timeless past, with few attempts to contextualize the items on display beyond small labels identifying tribal names. The cases were loosely organized, and some appeared to be an ad hoc mix of random items in the collection. So you can see here, for example, this case has just things from all different parts of Native North America. And then over here, you'd see some, there are arrows and spear points, and there's no explanation of any of that. Furthermore, the 1,500 items on display had been subject to lack of care, no or little rotation, bad mounts, so some of the objects were tacked to the back of cases and thus badly damaged. This is perhaps the most egregious example from the old hall, and this is a hide painting by the renowned Kiowa artist Silverhorn, which, as you can see, or you may not be able to quite see, but there were numbers pasted on the actual hide. Here's this little statement, the title supposedly of the painting, pasted right on the actual work of art, and then this tiny little label here. And a past president of the Field Museum, when he saw this, he just commented on how shameful it was that it had been treated this way, because this could be the equivalent to a Rembrandt in significance. And indeed, Silverhorn is one of the most well-known hide painting artists and ledger artists of his time. This is a real work of art. So despite recognizing the problems, the museum administration did not prioritize renovating the hall until a dramatic intervention made people see things differently. This intervention was a result of a strategy I had embarked on to bring Native American perspectives into the representation of contemporary life. The strategy was informed by my long-term experience, as you heard in the intro, conducting participatory applied research, which entailed building relationships with community organizations in varied settings where I had worked. Participatory research has a long history in anthropology and is now considered a valid approach to making anthropological insights useful to community efforts to solve social problems, address inequalities, and improve quality of life. Participatory research approaches are spreading in all subdisciplines of anthropology and have led to innovative and novel methodologies and modes of dissemination of research findings. And I think you all know that in archaeology, if some of you have accompanied archaeologists on field trips, that what it's like to do participatory research. In applying a participatory approach to representation of Native Americans for the Field Museum, I work with artists who are uniquely situated to both convey an individual and a collective point of view on the historical items and their relevance to contemporary life. I had co-curated several small exhibitions with contemporary artists when we invited Chris Papan, who's an enrolled member of the Kaw Nation and of Osage and Cheyenne River Lakota descent. He's a Chicagoan and represents a growing cohort of contemporary Native artists who are innovating with traditional art forms, in his case, ledger art of the Plains Indians like Silverhorn, to create contemporary cutting-edge works. We decided that given Chris's ledger art form, he could place his work directly in the old hall, some directly applied to the cases, treating them as ledger paper. This approach drew people in to more closely examine the content of the cases and notice the urgency to renovate the hall. So you can see here that on this case, there was a big buffalo in the old hall, and Chris put his rendering of on ledger paper of buffalo to protect the ancient being here. And then people started looking at this, and he did the same with other cases where he layered his work right on the case. And you're looking at the work and you see behind, and you see how terrible the mounting is of these old objects. And so our administration started really seeing how much work needed to be done to, that we had to do it urgently. So that began the effort to undertake the renovation and create an entirely new exhibition. So given our commitment to collaboration, we knew that the first step to undertaking the project was the formation of an advisory committee. The committee of 11 Native museum professionals, tribal leaders, scholars, and artists guided every aspect of the project, from the main messages we should convey to the design of the look and feel of the exhibition. So this is our committee here in the front, and then this is the staff at that time that was working with our committee on the exhibition. We also were fortunate to have Native American co-curators working with me on the exhibition. So we had Deborah Yepa Papan, who's the community engagement coordinator for the museum. That was her role, but she also is an artist and brought in a lot of, from her network of artists, Dr. Eli Suzukovich, who is a PhD in anthropology, and Dr. Miranda Roberts, who's a public historian, has a PhD in public history. And so the three of them were instrumental in helping to do the research and co-curate the exhibition. And we also, for the first time, had more than one collection and conservation staff who were Native American. And this made a big difference in how we began to see and treat and care for the collection. So the collaborative approach, because we had Native staff, because we were committed to collaboration, it spread beyond the creation of the exhibition to changing the way we actually care for the collections. And there was a growing recognition that indigenous methodologies of care can provide more durable and innovative ways to maintain the collection. So you see, what you see here is this stand-up headdress, Women's Society stand-up headdress from the Blackfeet Nation. And this is Charlene Plume and her apprentice who came for 1 week to help us. This was a piece in our collection that had been sort of sitting there and was in terrible need of care. It had not been on display, but it was still in need of care. And so our conservators worked with Charlene, and they took apart the entire headdress here. And Charlene found, she's an expert, she makes headdresses herself, and she found new rawhide. Every single feather was treated by her and her apprentice with Aaron's help, our conservator here. And, you know, it was a real, this is what I mean by paradigm shift. I don't think 10 years ago, the Field Museum conservation staff would not have undertaken a collaborative care of an item like this, you know, in our collection. So it was really a matter of learning how to trust Native experts and work with them. And here's the result. It's just a beautiful piece that's now on display. The husbands were there to support their respective wives on the visit, and our team and everybody is delighted with the result. So I just want to say that that collaboration is really about decentering power. And what does that mean? At its heart, collaboration involves creating a dialogue among equals, not extracting information from one party, but sharing knowledge in a respectful way. It requires building trust, especially between unequally situated parties, as the museum is vis-a-vis the Native communities with whom we collaborate. And it matters because it leads to more accurate and richer narratives that can provide deeper insights into social life, past and present. So it's not just the feel-good kind of thing to do, or do it because it's the right thing to do, which it is, but because it really does lead to a better scientific understanding of culture and of social life, both in the past and the present. And I think it's important to note that increasingly, as we work more in collaboration with Native communities, Indigenous communities around the world, we understand how Indigenous knowledge continues to be rich and has been transmitted from generation to generation and has not been lost. So, for example, when I work in the Amazon regions of Peru with Indigenous communities, we see this where Indigenous environmental knowledge is what has led to sustainable ways to conserve forests in the Amazon. And in the case of Native Americans, as traumatized as they've been and displaced as they've been, incredible amounts of knowledge have remained transmitted from generation to generation. And that knowledge continues to guide the way that people construct life, the way that cultural practices can continue. So it's scientifically important to collaborate and to share knowledge and to build relationships of trust to get better insight into the kinds of social and cultural practices that we care about as anthropologists. And so in the case of the Field Museum, what we're trying to do now is move that collaboration beyond NAGPRA. not just necessarily only what the law tells us to do, but thinking about how to use what we have in the collection to build reciprocal relationships with communities. So in this case, as part of the exhibition process, we rematriated, is what it's called, seeds that were in our collection, about 100-year-old seeds from the Meskwaki in Tama, Iowa. We rematriated them to the Meskwaki to see if they could regenerate some of those seeds, which people have been able to do successfully from other museum collections. So far, the seeds have not regenerated, but they're continuing to try to do that. And we're doing collaborative research. My colleague, Dr. Suzukovic, is conducting collaborative research with the Meskwaki on ways to regenerate seeds, revitalize heirloom crops, and so on. So now I'm going to show you some slides and tell you a little bit about the new exhibit. It's completely different from the old. We took the old one, completely deinstalled the old one. All of those 1,500 objects were carefully treated and put into our collections with collaboration from the native people whose heritage they were. We talked to TIPOs about how best to care for them in the collections. So they're all resting. And this is the new exhibit, Native Truths, Our Voices, Our Stories. And it starts with this kind of immersive installation by a contemporary Chicago artist, Santiago X. And I want to just say that staying on my path of involving Native American contemporary artists, we commissioned over 50 works for the new exhibit by contemporary artists that if you come and see the exhibit at the Field Museum, you'll see all of these contemporary works, starting with Santiago X's. And what he was trying to do was really immerse you in what he says is you are on native land. It's getting that right away. You get that feel. So the exhibition advisory committee and the exhibitions team, we came up with sort of 5 main native truths or concepts that we wanted our museum public to know. And so here you see one of these concepts. Our ancestors connect us to the past, present, and future. And each native truth is illustrated by these individual cases told from the perspective of an individual or community storyteller, we call them, who what we did was we, because of the pandemic, of course, we couldn't go out and talk to people in their communities, but Zoom was a lifeline. It was a friend in this case. And so we were Zooming with our storytellers every couple of weeks, and they chose all of the objects in their display. And oftentimes those are combined with objects of their making if they were an artist. And so in this case, this is Reuben Ironhorse Kent, who's Iowa, and he has been making ceramics in the tradition of the people of his descent, of his ancestors, the Oneota people. And so he has, you can sort of see these shards here that are from his collection. And then he's making pots. There's a video here. There would be a video that shows how what his process is of, he goes and gets his own clay and then he makes the pots. But he's also got fascinated with raku, Japanese ceramic style. And so he's raku, and he wanted to show those as well. So he's got some raku pieces in here in his display as well. But in each case, in these cases, you can see that the perspective of the storyteller on the way that ancestors connect us is here. in each of these displays. And also, I wanted to point out here that we were so fortunate and grateful to the Menominee Nation who gifted us this maple for the floor. So the whole flooring is from the Menominee tribe, from their award-winning sustainable forestry enterprise. And our advisors wanted us to give the feel and look of use native materials like birch bark from our region and copper, you see that, to sort of emphasize both our home place and as a native land. All right, I think I'm going on too long. I'll be done in 5 minutes. Another truth was the land shapes who we are. So here you see examples from the cases for that. And then there's a truth which is about the museum. And this is the only truth really that has museum voice in it. Every other truth, every other story is told from the perspective of the native storyteller. But this one, we wanted to take responsibility for acknowledging the harm that our collecting practices, as with many other museums, have done, and how we are trying to shift the paradigm now and work with Native communities. So in addition to the truths, which are kind of along the sides of the new hall, in the middle are what we're calling rotating galleries. So these rotating galleries will, because we didn't want to make the mistake of a permanent hall that just would stay there for 50 years again, not change. We can't really do that. And so we included spaces where there will be new stories every year and a half. There'll be a new story here so that, you know, more representation of the 574 plus Native tribes in the United States can be told over time. And, you know, and just to keep the vibrancy and resilience of Native peoples in the forefront. And so this is a rotating gallery, but this will always be a rotating gallery about the Chicago Native American community. And Chicago has one of the largest Native American communities in the United States, over 65,000 people. And we had a special Chicago advisory committee who, you know, helped us develop this little gallery here. And it's really about the way Chicago has always been a Native gathering place. And we have a canoe that was part of the canoe club in Chicago, where they used to canoe down the Chicago River. And this is a rotating gallery about the Chaco Canyon sacred site, which for the Pueblos remains, it's not just an ancestor site, it's a living, vibrant place for today for the Pueblos, and they care for it in that way, and they're trying to protect it against the dangers of fracking. And so that story is told here with our co-curators who are all from the Southwest and we're on our advisory committee. And I just want to point out that the contemporary art is woven throughout the exhibit. And what that really begins to do is showcase the way that past is connected to the present, that it's not a linear experience. It's not like this is the past and this is the present. And I'm going to talk more about this next week at the Rapid talk about the way Native Americans collapse time or think about time differently. And so that is, we were able to do that using contemporary art. So here's a contemporary piece by Max Early, who's a Laguna Pueblo potter. And it's sitting next to a piece that was in our collection by Arawak, who was a two-spirit. They're both two-spirit artists. You know, so we were able to, again, the idea here is to bring our historical pieces to life, to show that they continue to have power and relevance today. So where do we go from here? We were fortunate enough to build an endowment for this exhibit that allows us to permanently rotate the galleries, to have a permanent advisory committee that will advise us on new stories we want to tell. But also, we just received a grant from the Mellon Foundation, and that grant will allow us to bring Native staff on board permanently, but also to start a fellowship program for young emerging Native scholars in conservation and collections care, to do loans to tribal museums, and to do a sharing of knowledge between our collection staff and Indigenous experts. So we're really excited about that, and about the commitment by the Field Museum also is going to be using this collaborative approach for renovation or modifications of other cultural halls, such as the Africa and Egypt halls, which is next on the docket for renovation at the Field Museum. And there's also excitement around collaboration for research. Just yesterday and today, we had a 2-day convening with tribal authorities and historical preservation officers from tribes in our region, the Ho-Chunk, the Potawatomi, the Ojibwe, and they're going to be collaborating with our staff who are working in the Calumet around we're trying to create which is on the southeast side of Chicago and into Indiana, trying to create a heritage area there that will include now Native voice, Native interpretive trails. And they're also wanting to collaborate with our archaeology faculty, Bill Parkinson and others, on just started a project in the Midewin National Tallgrass Prairie site. And so this is all really exciting. Bill found a site that is seems to be about 1,000 years old. So they were all very excited today to think about how they could collaborate with him and his team on that research project. So this is the paradigm shift I'm talking about. It's not just the exhibition. It is a different way that a museum can begin to do research, exhibition, collections care. And I think it'll benefit everyone as we do that. So I want to thank our team, and all of us were changed. I think it's not just an intellectual process, but an emotional project by the experience of working with Native community members. And here are some of the over 100 storytellers that work with us. We're so grateful to them for their generosity and willingness to share their stories and push us forward. So thank you so much. And I'm gonna stop sharing, and I think we'll do some questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Wali. I hope everyone will join me in giving those reactions if you haven't already. That was such a wonderful talk about the present and future of collaboration with Indigenous scholars and artists in the US. So yes, great. Yeah, bring the thanks. I have not seen this before on Zoom, this instant reaction that you can see.
Thank you, everyone. That's so great.
Hands and hearts, very, very nice.
Yeah.
So I would just remind everyone that if you would like to pose a question for our guests, please do so in the Q&A. So separate from the chat. I myself am learning about this just today, but there is a Q&A function. that will allow you to ask questions. So I'm just going to jump into those. We have until the hour, and I think we can get through most of these questions here. So I'm going to start with a question from Stephen Wiseman. He asks, how did your process compare to that employed by the, and this I assume means the American Museum of Natural History?
Great question. And we've been following their work. And I think I haven't had a chance to go see their new Northwest Coast Hall, which they also did in collaboration with Native Northwest Coast communities. And I understand that it's fantastic. And it's not that, you know, I think we're all on a similar trajectory. I think museums in general have embraced the concepts of collaboration because they see how successful it is to work with Native communities in telling stories. And there are other museums that are also similarly doing this work. So we're part of a movement here, I think.
Our next question is from an anonymous attendee. They ask, do you have any advice on how to reframe your own perspective, both as a lover of history and as an individual in this society?
Wow. And how to reframe? Can you reframe perspective?
Yeah. I mean, Alaka, you have access also to the Q&A questions. Yeah, but reframe your own perspective, both as a lover of history and as an individual in this society.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way, at least as an anthropologist, that I do that is listening to other perspectives. And so once you start really listening, and that's what we're trained to do as anthropologists, and I think archaeologists too, as lovers of history, they're listening to the material record that they uncover, but they also do that now in collaboration with the living descendants of the people that they're studying, of the past that they're studying, right, Matthew? And so I think that understanding that, you know, multiple perspectives on similar data can tell you so much more. I think that's the way we can reframe and still maintain our own perspective, if that makes sense.
Moving on now to a question from Julie Nader. She asks, what do you mean by a two-spirit artist? Point of clarification.
Oh yeah, thank you. That's a good question too. So there's you know, not all Indigenous people use the term two-spirit, but generally it means it's a way of distinguishing non-binary gender category. It's a way of saying I'm not either male or female. I have both spirits in me. And so, you know, that's been in some Native American tribes or societies, that's a really accepted and wonderful way of being. And so the example I showed of Arawak, who was Laguna, they were a very respected member, and you see the gorgeous ceramics. They were renowned for that work in their time. And Max Early is a contemporary Laguna two-spirit artist also, and poet, who's also gaining fame. So they're, you know, it's a fluid gender identity, I guess, is the best way to put it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yeah. Next, we have a question from Jean Marie Stumpf, and she asks, and about, actually, I won't assume gender identity, but in future questions, but is there an oral history component to these collections that is stories and myths?
Yes, that's a great question. So, you know, some of the storytellers, they are telling creation stories as part of what, especially in that section on ancestors, connect us to the past, present, and future. There's a display. I'm sorry I didn't put a slide in there, but I can go back and hold on for a minute. Let me see if I can pull up that last slide. Karen Ann Hoffman, she is a Oneida raised bead worker, and she is here we go. Here she is teaching at her kitchen table, but she has made she's in her display. She tells this creation story of Sky Woman, which is an Ojibwe and Anishinaabe creation story. So throughout you'll see there's another display with other creation stories in there, or myths, right, I guess, or historical narratives, if you will, that are in throughout the exhibition. Yeah, so it's a big continued vibrant part of Native American culture.
Okay, there's a question in the Q&A from Stephen Wiseman. We've heard from Stephen already, so I appreciate the passion, but I am going to allow other voices to come forward here, if that's okay. William Green says, hi, Alaka.
Hi.
It looks like this exhibition complements the existing Hall of the Ancient Americas and the Pawnee Earth Lodge. Will those continue, quote, as is for a while, or will they be renovated soon?
Oh my goodness, great question. Well, the Pawnee Earth Lodge, you see our Pawnee Cultural Committee right here, they work with us. So the lodge has remained, and I did get to talk about that, but it's been completely reinterpreted now. So the Pawnee really wanted the lodge to stay, because for them, it's the real living lodge, and there aren't very many of them left around in the United States. And actually this lodge was built in the 1970s with the advice and consultation of Pawnee elders who came and helped the museum staff at that time make that lodge. So, even back then there was that collaboration. And so, but on the outside of the lodge now, there are new cases that our committee here helped us develop that are about contemporary Pawnee concerns and enduring cultural values that have remained since the time that Pawnee were living in lodges. So it's really great. In the Ancient Americas exhibit, that was renovated, as I said, by 2006. And I think eventually we will want to make some changes there, just because we don't think halls should remain as they are. I mean, science has changed, right? We have different understandings now about the cultural history of the ancient Americas because new scientific discoveries have happened. So it'll change eventually. But for now, it's been that way since 2006.
I'm happy to hear from the organizers about extending time, but my assumption is that we should start to wrap up. With that said, I'll pose one more question from an anonymous attendee. That is, have you ever, a very important question, I think, have you ever encountered a group who does not want to collaborate with museum institutions? How do we recognize stories and/or objects within our collections from communities who perhaps rightfully do not want to share knowledge with museums?
That is a really important question. It's not that a tribe will say we don't want to, but individuals certainly do. There are contemporary artists who do not want their work shown at a natural history museum because it's awkward. Putting their work in with mummies and dinosaurs doesn't fit for them. And we talk about that in our exhibition, the pain that communities feel, and the criticism they have of natural history museums. So, and I think we have to respect if a tribe does not want research done or does not want, we are not, we now do a lot of consulting. So if a tribe says we don't want our objects on display, we do not put them on display, and so on. So I think that's another way that museums are changing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Let me just, in conclusion, share one more time some slides from the organization, just for all our attendees, a wonderful number of attendees. But I just want to remind you that if you wish to become a member of our organization, you can sign up at archaeological.org/join, and support is possible at archaeological.org/donate. We, of course, appreciate any collaboration and contribution you can make. And just a heads up to those who were excited by this lecture, as I know I was, and are looking forward to further lectures. You can see here we have a lineup for the remaining months of the academic year. Some very exciting talks coming up. Not just additional speakers, but also Dr. Wali herself will be giving a repeat performance of this lecture tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern time, but then a different lecture on Thursday, October 27th at 2 p.m. Note the time, Eastern time. That is representing Native American perspectives on time, examples from the Field Museum. Super fascinating topic. And then in November, we have Dr. Tess Davis from the Antiquities Coalition in Washington, D.C., lecturing on Tuesday, November 5th, a very exciting looking talk, Blood Antiquities, Tomb Raiders, Art Smugglers, and the Black Market and Cultural Treasures. I know that'll interest many of you. And on Thursday, November 17th at 2 p.m. Eastern time, The Wild Wild East, Combating the Black Market in Ancient Asian Art. And that brings me to a conclusion with my official slides, but I want to thank you all once again. Let me stop my share here. Thank you all once again for your participation. I'll leave it to the organizers or Dr. Wali if they want to have any final thoughts, but it was my honor to moderate this panel. So everyone have a wonderful night. Moderators, Dr. Wali, anything?
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for great questions and comments.
Okay, great. That seems like it. So have a great night, everyone. And we hope to see you next time with these official AIA events. So check your calendar for details about future lectures. Okay. Wonderful. Okay. Have a great night, everyone.